going to be answering questions about Holo and Holochain. Just a little bit of background for those of you who aren't familiar. Holo is an attempt to do an incentivized hosting ecosystem. We're basically trying to build a bridge between the distributed or peer-to-peer internet of the future and today's existing internet users who are accustomed to logging onto websites through web browsers. Holochain is the project that we have created. It's an alternative to blockchain. It's a new way of running distributed applications. It's a new way of building distributed applications even. And we are excited about it. We launched it about a month ago. It's early. The first version is what we've called the Adventurer release. But Holochain enables people to run things like Facebook without Facebook in the middle, or Uber without Uber in the middle. And we think that's pretty exciting. Why did we build all this stuff? What's this all for? It's actually not because we're super excited about tech. It's that we are basically org dorks. We're really convinced that the world needs a better way of helping people coordinate and collaborate. That the methods we've historically had for coordination and collaboration often make it so that, hey, we've got a bunch of people who want to work together. And in order to do that, we end up sort of putting some power structure in the middle. And then all of the decision-making and the power ends up concentrating with that administration in the middle. We centralize power. And we think that it's possible, and we're working really hard to make it real, to have people be able to collaborate in really fluid ways that don't accidentally centralize power, that don't put the administration in the middle. So Holochain is an attempt to do that. Holo is really an attempt to make that the early adopters of that new paradigm not just off in their own corner, not separate from everybody else, but able to speak back to the existing internet and all of the, grandma who's used to going onto a browser, but she's not going to be downloading some new software and figuring out how to install it. So that's pretty much it. I'd love to have questions. If anybody's got them, I'll make a couple of announcements while we're waiting for more folks to jump on. We've got about 9 or 10 people already. Let's see, we have the big announcement is that we've got a crowdfunding campaign starting on Tuesday for Holo. We're going to be launching on Indiegogo, and we will be, we've got a few things available there. We have what are called Holo ports. There are personal servers that are going to allow you to easily host other people's activity online as people start trying to make use of the distributed web. You will be the gateway for those other folks. And the application developers who are seeking to connect with outsiders, let's say there's a group of people running a peer-to-peer version of Airbnb, if they want a website to be available that anybody can just go visit and pay with a credit card, you get compensated for sharing some of the spare computing capacity on your device. Well, the Holo port is a device that's built specifically for this. It's not that it's the only way to do this. You could use an existing computer. It's just the easiest. You get it, you plug it in, you go online, you set a couple of settings, and you're good to go. We've got the crowdfunding campaign launching Tuesday. We've got an early bird special for those who participate in the first day or two, and we'll share a link in the chat to be able to sign up for a reminder. Greg, if you can share that in a moment, that'd be great. We've got our first question starting to come in, so let's go ahead and just jump in. The first question was, how is Holo or Holochain different from Filecoin? So Filecoin is another distributed computing project. They're founded by a friend of ours, a guy named Juan Batiz Benet, wonderful human. They were one of the more successful crowdfunding campaigns or initial coin offerings of the last year, they raised about $250 million, a little more than that actually. Filecoin is about distributed storage. It's about taking spare computing capacity on our devices and using that to store videos or files, right? Holo, on the other hand, and Holochain are about distributed processing. So we do a little bit of storage, but that's not what we've focused on. What we've focused on is actually enabling people to run applications in a distributed way. So it's not, I will have a video that sits on your machine. It's we as a group will run our own ride sharing community or our own home sharing community or our own version of Google Docs where we can collaboratively edit documents. It's the ability to do changes to data that we've managed to crack the code on with Holochain. And Holo is what enables this distributed application ecosystem to be accessible by other people, by outsiders who are just logging on through a website. So the simplest example that I can think of is, as I mentioned earlier, you've got some home sharing app, something like Airbnb, but that's run by the hosts, where the hosts themselves get to decide whether or not they want to have video chat available, let's say. Right now with Airbnb, you're not allowed to, you don't get a phone number. They go through a lot of, they jump through a lot of hoops actually to try to prevent you from being able to share contact information, email, phone number, etc., before there's a booking, which means you don't actually get to know the person you're going to have stay with you until after you've decided to have them come stay with you. So it's useful for their business model, not necessarily the greatest fit for the hosts. If you had a group of hosts running an alternative themselves, they could say, yeah, you can call me, you can share a phone number with me and I can call you, etc. And at the same time, because they're running that application on their own devices, on their laptops, desktops, cell phones, etc., in order to have other people be able to interact with it, it's useful to be able to serve out a website. And if some of the members of that community go, yeah, I'll serve out a website, Holo is the mechanism by which those people get compensated for doing that extra work. It's the way in which they're able to get paid in cryptocurrency for responding, for having their device respond when somebody logs onto the website and tries to book a room. What's the value of that for the hosts? Well, the value is you make it easy for other people to book rooms in ways that they're already familiar with booking rooms, just going online, clicking through a couple of things, entering a credit card. And what the other benefit is that you're able to do that without giving up control to some centralized organization. The participants themselves are able to decide how this application is going to work, which makes it so that they can make sure that it works well for them, not necessarily for some other investor or organization. Filecoin, a couple other things about Filecoin. So it's using, it's mostly focused on peer-to-peer storage rather than peer-to-peer processing. So that's the main difference. On the back end, there's a little bit of differences as well. The Filecoin has their own protocol. They're also making use of some blockchain. Not everything they're doing is blockchain. They've got some other protocols that they're making use of, including, I believe, IPFS, and some interesting stuff around proof that you actually have set aside some storage capacity, right? So they're rewarding people for storage capacity. We're using Holochain as the backend. Both Holo itself is built on Holochain, and the applications themselves are built on Holochain. So these are applications that run in a distributed manner, and they do that from what we call an agent-centric perspective, which basically means each of the participants is holding on to their own copy of the data. So they get to control their own data. They're running the application locally, and they're able to coordinate with others in running the application so that information can propagate and they can interact and book rooms and do all that kind of stuff through the app. Holochain is our back end. Filecoin isn't making use of that because Filecoin launched before we had even finished our beta of Holochain. Though we are using some similar backends. We like IPFS. Some of the backend of Holochain is making use of some of the same libraries that were used to create IPFS and Filecoin. If I create an app, Jamie asks, if I create an app where I only want to have verified people use my version of it, can I do it? Great question, Jamie. Actually, yes. So this is mostly a Holochain question. In Holochain, when you create an app, you are able to set your own criteria for membership. That could be as simple as I give you a token, right? I give you a little key, and only people who have the keys that I've given them can join the app. Where would this be useful? Well, we're building an alternative to Slack, a peer-to-peer alternative to Slack, called HoloChat. If you wanted to set up your own little HoloChat team, where it's just the folks in your company able to talk in this private chat space, it's really important that you be able to decide who's able to come and talk there. You could do that by just giving out personalized tokens, right? The manager or the company owner or whatever, the administrator says, here we go, here's 10 different tokens, solid. However, you can also make it so that you can exercise discretion about who's able to enter your community through other means. It could be you have to have deposited $1,000 into this account, right? There has to be some money on escrow, and that makes it so that everybody else feels safe for you to play with. If you screw somebody over, or are bad in some way, you're going to forfeit that money. Or you have to show up with some reputation already established in a different community. Those are the kind of things that become really useful from our perspective, because they enable a community to manage its membranes. They enable it to manage membership in ways that constrain the risks that you're taking inside of that community, right? If you can make it so that it's only known actors or only people who have lots of skin in the game, then when you're operating inside of that space, you can be assured that your likelihood of being screwed over is less, because if somebody were to act badly, they're going to forfeit all of the reputation or the money that was put up or whatever in order to get into that community. So it's a really important part of why Holochain ends up creating much more flexibility in terms of the game dynamics that a community can make use of for helping to steer itself. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is enable communities to steer themselves more effectively. Let's see, we've got, Gary says, are there plans for a scalable cryptocurrency? Not for Holochain, though we do have a scalable cryptocurrency as part of Holo. So Holochain doesn't need cryptocurrency at all. The way that Holochain works, I'm running an app, you're running that app, someone else is running that app, and each of us our computers or our phones are doing work, and in exchange, we're getting to use the system, right? We get to participate in that application, and the way that we pay for that is that our phones bear some of the load of running that application as well. So it's a very commons-based sort of orientation. I think of it as similar to how language works. Nobody paid me to learn English. I learned English because I wanted to be able to speak with other folks. The cost there is that I have to hold on to English. I can't just forget it, and I probably have to practice it on a fairly regular basis for it to not go away. But the value that I get out of that is not being paid directly, it's the value that I get from being able to speak the language. Same thing with Holochain apps. With Holo, we have created a cryptocurrency that operates a little differently than most of the cryptocurrencies today. Holo, because it's really all about incentivizing people to do work that makes this distributed applications ecosystem accessible to the whole rest of the world, that removes the barrier to entry of having to jump through some unfamiliar steps of, to be honest, not all that difficult steps, but some unfamiliar steps of installing something and making some choices about which apps you want to run. Because we're trying to incentivize that, and we're incentivizing hosting, we actually had to take a different approach to cryptocurrency. Why? Well, people have had dreams of doing peer-to-peer hosting for a long time. But those dreams have been fantasies up until now because the value of the work being done, responding to a query for a web page, was so low that the cost of something like a credit card transaction dwarfed it. It doesn't make sense to pay people with credit card transactions that cost 25 cents plus, 3% or whatever, when the value of the work that's being done is a tenth of a cent or a half a cent, right? So cryptocurrencies, even ones like blockchain and Ethereum, their transaction fees right now are not cheap. I don't know what today's transaction fees on a blockchain, on a Bitcoin transaction are, but I think they're somewhere in the $10 range. Doesn't make much sense to keep track of 1 cent worth of work with something that costs $10 to process, right? Because Holo is built on Holochain, we were able to create a much lighter weight cryptocurrency. And really what we've done is we've created a crypto accounting system, a crypto credit system. It's a mutual credit cryptocurrency where we're basically keeping track of account balances. So if I am paying Gary in order to serve out a website that I'm the developer for, when somebody comes and uses that website, Gary does the work, his machine does the work, and he submits a receipt to me, and I credit him for that. My account goes down, his goes up. We're able to do this interaction, this transaction, using just the two of us. In our design for Holo, we also have a couple of other steps. We've got some notaries, each of us getting to pick our own notary, and then we're sharing to a broader shared space, which we call a distributed hash table. But the result is that we're able very quickly to come to a conclusion, to transact, and to have that added into the rest of the system. We don't have to wait for everybody else in the system to make a copy. And in fact, we don't have everybody else make a copy. Doing so would add a ton of cost, right? If we had 3,000 people making copies of the fact that Gary did 1 penny worth of work for Matt, they're going to actually have to spend much more money accounting for that work than Gary was able to create value doing that work. So that's the primary thing. Let's see, what else? Gary asked another one. How much time would running a Holo box at 50% of capacity be for the owner? What minimum of technical skills would be needed? Great question, Gary. We don't think it's going to be much time at all. We don't think that individuals should be spending their time running a Holo box. You can exercise discretion about what sorts of apps you want to run. Sorry, I'm just taking a note here. You can exercise some discretion about which apps you want to run, but you don't have to. You can use an automated setting to just set it and forget it. That the Holo port in particular should be really easy. It comes with all the software installed. It's configured specifically to be good for hosting. You plug it into a power plug, you hook it up to the internet, you jump on your laptop, you configure it, meaning you say, hey, let's just automate, earn me as much crypto as possible. And that's it. When other parties, when an application wants work done that you are, whether through automation or because you chose, you are running that app as well. When they ask for some work to be done, your machine can go, I got this. It will take the query, serve out the request, interact with the Holochain app on the back end, interact with the user who's operating on their web browser on the front end, and because you're serving as the bridge between those two worlds, your device gets paid. It may be only getting paid a few pennies, right, for a particular transaction. We don't want a human having to sit there and babysit that thing. It should be just earning on its own, and that's for the most part how it's going to work. Now, if you are somebody who's really geeky and technical and you've run your own server farms before, I'm sure you're going to be able to configure some kind of system that goes far beyond what a user needs to. You can definitely get geeky on this stuff like you can with any computing or hardware system. But unlike blockchain, where there's a limited amount of, how do I frame this? The proof of work algorithms that underlie incentives for blockchain mining basically make it so that normal people cannot profitably participate. People working on their laptop, people working on a Holo port type device in their home, they're not able to compete because somebody in, let's say China, has built specific hardware to work faster and more efficiently than generalized hardware. And what they're doing is they're winning a lottery. They're giving themselves better odds at winning essentially a 10-minute lottery where somebody gets awarded Bitcoins every 10 minutes. Holo is different. You're not winning a lottery here. You're doing work. And if your machine does some work for somebody, you get compensated for the work that you've done. And we think that that's a really interesting and much more distributed way of doing this. One of the big complaints that people in the blockchain space have is that the proof of work algorithms are concentrating and centralizing power, that there's a very small group of miners who basically have an oligarchy and control not only the mining capacity of the network, meaning they're the ones making all the money, but they control the future of the network. They're getting to dictate how the protocols will change over time. That doesn't feel good to us. And so we've designed something different that spreads power much more evenly. It's really important to us that people be able to participate as full peers with regular, ordinary devices, right? You should not have to have special devices in order to be able to be treated like a citizen, basically, of this new distributed web. Robert says, what's a good approximately 2-minute pitch for someone who knows very little about blockchain and distributed tech about why they would want to get involved in the Holochain ecosystem through the crowdfund, etc.? Most of my friends would fit into this group. How do I get them excited? All right, thank you, Robert. For me, it's pretty simple. Holo and Holochain are really driven by one main mission. We think it's really important that each of us gets to be in control of our own lives, our own digital lives, that we get to control the data that we generate in the world, and that we get to decide how we interact with others, that we get to be in control of the applications that we're using. Holochain is interesting in that it's kind of like how card games work in the real world. When you play cards, the rules are held in the minds of each of the individuals. Each individual holds the rules themselves. And if they decide they don't want to play that game anymore, they can decide to leave. They can go, or they can propose to change the game. They can say, hey, how about this next hand we play some other game instead? Or we modify the rules. How about we make threes wild on this next hand? And if the other participants go, yeah, that sounds good, then all of a sudden you're playing a different game. We think that's really important. We think it's important for people to be able to try new things, for others to be able to go, ooh, I like that. I'm willing to try that as well. because we think that that's actually something that enables us to better steer our own lives. We think that it's not just the data that matters. It's important that we have control over our data. I think most people today will admit, yeah, the web is kind of creepy. That applications feel like the way the web works today, it feels like I'm being watched. It feels like, I go online, I look up something, and for the next 2 weeks, I'm being bombarded with ads for that thing, which we all know means I'm being stalked in various ways online. This does not feel good. This does not feel empowering. This doesn't feel like how the world should work. Holochain is a way of running applications that puts power back in the hands of individuals and enables them to coordinate with others in ways that work for both of them. It enables us as individuals and as communities to better foster trust and build thriving interactions that are fruitful for those involved. So that's the main pitch for Holochain. For Holo, it's one, a commitment to that same empowerment concept, and two, we're basically taking some of the lessons from the sharing economy, things like Airbnb and Uber, and saying, hey, instead of sharing your house, you've got a computer. You can share some of the spare capacity on your computer. And not only will you get rewarded for that, you will be able to, sorry, I'm just noticing like a light starting to flicker. I'm gonna turn this off. Okay. Not only will you get rewarded for that, but you will be supporting other people in their interactions with this distributed system, as well as bootstrapping your own. If you are using your machine to run your Holo port or your laptop to participate in Holo, you're also going to be able to use it for your own use. So whether you're doing your own peer-to-peer hosting, or you're doing peer-to-peer Twitter, or you're doing a version of Slack, all of a sudden you're able to start interacting with others in ways where you're in control of it, not somebody else. You don't need a middleman between you and the people that you're communicating with. And you don't need that middleman, one, dictating how you speak, and two, deciding when to throw ads in your face, right? That's not to say that's not to say that the web today isn't wonderful and amazing. It's just to say that it can be a lot better. And for us, we think that a world where you have greater privacy, security, control over your own information is important. But the stuff that really gets us excited is the ways in which you will be able to do new things, the ways in which you'll be able to take a comment or a credential or something that someone has said about you nicely. Like his car was clean, and you're able to use that in a new context. That with you being in control of your data, you get to take it wherever you want to, and that enables you to start to interact with people in some new and exciting ways. John asks, will Holo be open source and available on GitHub? Holochain is open source. I believe Holo will be open source as well, but we haven't. Right now, Holo is a design. We haven't started coding it yet. So yes, it should be available on GitHub. Currently, it is not. We do have all the details about Holo up on our holo.host website. The main things to check out there, if you want to dive into all the details, are our currency paper, which goes through what makes our design for the cryptocurrency Holo Fuel special, and our green paper. The green paper is pretty great. It walks through a bunch of the different innovations that we've created and how those fit together. Meg asked, what's the difference between Holo and a mesh network? Okay, so a mesh network is this idea that you can have a bunch of devices that are sharing signals with one another, And as a result, you're able to share messages across physical devices. So mesh networks have proven really useful in situations like natural disasters, where the existing internet infrastructure collapsed, and usually a government agency or somebody was able to come in and set up a handful of antennas and enable people to start communicating with one another again. Mesh networks are useful. They operate at the physical layer, right? It's the how do I connect to these other folks and start sending messages across. Holo is something that operates at the application layer, and so Holo is really about, and Holochain are really about, how are we able to hold and use an application with just the participants. So the way that I frame it is, Holochain applications fit really well with mesh networks. If you are in Puerto Rico and the internet has been knocked out, but in this neighborhood or across several neighborhoods, you've been able to throw up a mesh network, you now have the ability to connect and send messages around that community. But that mesh network might not be connected to the main internet, or if it is, there might not be much bandwidth available. Well, with most of today's internet applications, yes, you've got this mesh network, but if we're using, again, Google Docs or Facebook or something like that, I want to send a message to you. You're a kilometer away. When I send that through Facebook, it doesn't go to you, it goes to Facebook. And if it can't get to Facebook because the connection isn't good, it doesn't get to you. So because we have our application structured in a way where there's always a man in the middle, even if we've got some connectivity locally, I'm not able to send stuff to you because the way the app was built, it had to go to the data center in Silicon Valley before it could come back to you. That's silly. That doesn't make sense, but it's how our apps work today. With Holochain apps, that changes. And with Holo, it makes it that changes as well. Holochain and Holo both will enable applications where you and I can send messages and they can jump across that mesh network and get to you. So they're two different layers. One, Holo and Holochain are really at the application layer. Mesh networking is about something that's happening at the physical layer, us connecting devices and having just a way of transferring information across them. My belief is Holo can actually help accelerate the use of mesh networks, in part by providing an incentive scheme. We can make it so that, yes, I'm willing to share my bandwidth. You don't have access to your service provider here. I do. Okay, I'm willing to have you route your content through my phone, and I'll get compensated for it. It's a tiny amount, but I get compensated for it. We can also have that not just route from my phone to somebody, to the main internet, but from my phone directly to someone else, in which case I'm not actually using any of my bandwidth with my service provider. I'm just adding bandwidth capacity to the network because I'm helping your messages piggyback across, and I get compensated. That's kind of a big deal, and it's something that we think Holo might enable in the near future. We're not building specifically focused on that right now. We're mostly focused on application hosting, which is primarily about storage and processing. But Holo's currency architecture is a decent fit for bandwidth transactions as well, because it's so good at that tiny amount of work, at being able to get people compensated for doing a tiny amount of work. So I'll leave that there. I think that there's some really interesting stuff about how Holo may accelerate the growth of mesh networking. Gary asks, so Holo would need to work within Holo apps? Yes, or Holochain apps. That's correct. So one, Holo is a Holochain application. So it's built on top of Holochain. That's why it's efficient as a distributed system. Two, Holo serves Holochain applications. Basically, the point of the Holo network is to create a bridge between people who are running a Holochain app and outsiders who are just wanting to access something through a web browser. And so the back end is these peer-to-peer applications where users are empowered and in control of their own data. And on the front end is somebody who's wanting to visit that space and interact with it in some way, whether it's booking a room or whatever that app is up to. Gary also asks, what about RAM? 16 gigabytes versus 32 gig versus 64 gig. Great. So we've got three in our crowdfunding campaign. We are offering a few different things. We're offering some developer trainings. We're offering some hardware. The hardware we're calling the Holoport. We've got three versions. We've got the Holoport Nano, which is, I think the crowdfunding price is discounted to $999. The Holoport Nano has a little bit of flash memory and a bit of RAM, 2 gigs of RAM, but it's really designed to be plugged into an external hard drive, right? It's designed for you to take some existing hardware and make use of it. The Holoport, just the standard or complete, has 8 gigs of RAM. It's got a terabyte of hard drive space. It has a faster processor. The Nano has a 1.2 gigahertz processor, whereas the complete has a 2.9 gigahertz processor. And all of these have gigabit Ethernet. The Holoport Plus is $999. And it's got 16 gigs of RAM, 2 terabyte hard drive, and 128 gigabyte SSD, which is the solid state drive. So, yeah, we're trying to give a few different options at different price points. The higher end price points are obviously going to have greater capacity, which means they're going to be able to serve. They're going to be able to serve more clients, customers, visitors, and earn more Holo fuel. Jamie says, if I only wanted to have certain Holo boxes do the hosting, the app, so that we can have them be certain to keep updated versions of the software, would that be possible? I'm not exactly sure what Jamie's asking here. If I only wanted to have certain Holo boxes host the app, so that we can have them be certain to keep updated versions of the software, would that be possible? I'm not sure off the top of my head, Jamie. I think that there are mechanisms that the application developer can use. There's criteria the app developer can use for deciding who can host and what the criteria is that you want on the hosting. But I don't know off the top of my head if you're able to pick specific boxes. The question about version control, you will be routing. Version control is kind of baked into Holochain. If they're running, if the party is running a slightly different application, even if there's one character in the code that's different, they're running a completely different application. So this is core to Holochain's architecture. The application code has to be identical, or we consider you running something completely different. So there's not going to be a, hey, we're now running version 3, this guy's running version 2, whoops, we accidentally routed content to him. Nope, that's not going to happen. It's going to be very clear. As soon as you move to version 3, they are no longer in a shared space. So you're not going to be routing content to some Holo host that is running an out-of-date app. If you want a little more information on that, you can go to the holo.host website. I think the green paper may be able to dive into that a little bit. There's the version control. We've come up with a number of mechanisms for enabling people to migrate across versions, but the whoops, I accidentally sent somebody to an old version. Not an issue at all. Part of Holochain's architecture is something called a source chain. Each participant has their own copy of the source chain. So you, the app developer, might have a copy. This particular host might have a copy. The very first entry in that copy is the application code. And that code is going to generate a hash, a little short fingerprint. And the first thing that your machine does is check to make sure that it's the right hash. If they're running a different application that has a different fingerprint, they're not running the same app. You're not going to be directing traffic towards them. Dominic says, what if a host has weak security and is processing my info? I'm not sure what the question is here. I guess you're envisioning something being well, there's two things. One, if you're sharing some public information, if you're sharing information publicly within that Holochain, it's going to be visible to everybody who's participating in that app. If you're sharing private information, it's going to be encrypted. And so even if they have weak security, what they'd be able to see is your encrypted stuff, which is what other people would be able to see as well. I'm not sure if that 100% matches your question or not. So I'll follow it up with, can my data be compromised by using the service? I don't believe so. Like, the whole point of our system is we're using cryptography to enable people to run peer-to-peer applications. I'm not sure if what you're talking about is I'm sharing something publicly with a trusted participant in a community, and will they breach my trust? Or if they've been hacked, can something happen? There's one set of questions there. There's another set of questions, which is, if I'm running as a host, is there anything that's going to happen on my machine that's going to be problematic? And on both of those sides, I think the answer is no. When you're serving as a host, the stuff that happens in the application stays in that application. They're not able to get access to the rest of your machine. It's sort of like when you're using a web browser, it's not able to open Adobe Illustrator without your permission. All right, Dominic's kind of asking this question in several ways. He said, someone hacks my phone. My phone is hosting with Holochain. Couple things there. One, you probably wouldn't be hosting. You could be using a Holochain app on your phone, and so it would be bearing its own load. You probably wouldn't be hosting for Holo on Holochain with a phone, just because a phone is an expensive way to provide hosting. Your bandwidth is not cheap, and the phone's capacities are pretty expensive relative to what it costs to provide similar storage and processing on a laptop. If they hack your phone, they're going to see the same stuff that comes into your phone. I mean, if you are if the data is encrypted, they're going to be able to see encrypted data. If the data is something that's being shared publicly in a shared space, they may be able to see the copy that's on your phone. I'll leave it with that for now. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Dimajur Mitch, how do we know Holo won't sell our data in some way? Have you done security audits? So there's two questions there. One, Holo doesn't get your data. So that's part of the interesting nature of this architecture. The data stays with the members of the application system. Holo is just helping do some accounting when work gets done by one of the participants. So we don't see your data, which means we're not going to be able to sell your data. What we end up seeing is somebody transferred some Holo fuel to someone else, right? And they did that by demonstrating that they had done some work with a little log of the work that they had done. Security audits, we have not yet done security audits. Holo hasn't been built out all the way. Holochain is still maturing. Part of why we're doing this crowdfunding is so that we can mature our software, do some security audits, and also build out a foundational layer of hosts. We want to make it so that in the spring of 2018, when we launch Holo, that we've got a good solid network of high quality hosting boxes. We're basically selling our boxes at cost, the Holo ports, because we want top quality stuff that's on constantly so that the network has a foundation that is stable. So when people go to make use of these apps or log in through a website, whatever, they don't have any delays, they don't have any problems, there's no hiccups. We need there to be at least a minimum solid base level of hosting capacity on the network so that it's not buggy and weird right off the bat. That said, people are going to be able to add capacity using ordinary laptops and all kinds of other stuff, so the ecosystem can grow. But we're trying to make it so that it starts out with a solid base. In terms of security audits, et cetera, that's going to take some dough, and it's part of why we're crowdfunding and trying to raise money from our community over the next couple of months. Without going into too much more detail there, we have not taken investment from venture capitalists. We've given away zero equity. I'm an employee. I'm not getting any equity. Why? Because our goal is to hand this over to the community down the line. Right off the bat, we're trying to give our community some say over how the revenues that come in get spent, what the things are that they get spent on, and our plans are to actually grow the portion of our revenues that get steered by the community over time until it's actually completely steered by the community. So we're not taking money from outside investors, not because we dislike outside investors, but because we didn't want to make promises to them of you will become super billionaires, whatever, right? Because we saw that as conflicting with us growing this ecosystem into what it should be, which is something that empowers the individuals and fosters new forms of collaboration. Luis asked, what do I need to host on Holo? You need a computer, you need an internet connection. That's it. You're going to be able, spring of 2018, you're going to be able to download Holo. You're going to be able to start installing applications that you like, or choosing to automate that process and just install whatever applications look like they're going to be the most profitable for you to run, perhaps. You may have some other criteria as well. And that's it. It's set it and forget it. With the Holo port, it's going to be super easy. Download, plug it in, check automate, and go. And it should start earning crypto for you. But it should be that simple. This is not intended to be a geeks-only project. We think it's really important that the internet start working for everyone and not just people who've spent their entire life playing with computers or focusing their efforts on understanding computers more deeply than others. If this stuff is going to be a tool for all of us to be able to collaborate, it has to be easy enough for all of us to use. Bond says, can I use IPFS as the back-end storage for Holoport instead of using its hard storage? I don't know. I think so. Maybe. I'm not sure on that one. I'd have to check with with our developers. I thought you were going to ask if you can use IPFS as back-end storage for your own application. I don't see why you wouldn't be able to. But there might be some. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not certain on that one. It's an interesting use case for IPFS. Is something that's focused on storing content, which means it's good for storing big pieces of content. there may be something there. I don't know why you would. It may be a way of extending the capacity of your drive. There's probably some concerns there depending on the nature of the data that you're storing, if that's supposed to be held in some private way. But if it's encrypted, you could throw it in IPFS and it'd be fine. Simon says, I have an online education platform. How do I integrate the platform with Holochain for scalability? Would I need to develop the app before integration? So Holochain is a way of building apps. If you are going to use it with your existing online platform, you'd probably start by creating a small app that's useful for a part of what you're trying to do. It's early days, right? In Holochain land, this is like 1989 for the World Wide Web, right? Like Tim Berners-Lee first wrote up all that stuff in '89, and it's early days. So the things that are going to be built earliest are going to be small, simple, probably widely applicable pieces. We're building some of those ourselves. We were already seeing other people starting to build those. Somebody built a peer-to-peer and fractal version of Wikipedia a couple weeks back at one of our hackathons in Barcelona. It's not going to be the case that you'll just take your existing app and throw it into Holochain. You're going to have to, if you're going to try to do something with Holochain, you're actually going to need to develop the app from the Holochain framework, the way that we think about people holding on to their content and how they interact with one another, and how they, in a Holochain application, everything is signed by the participant. It's just a fundamentally different way of thinking about an application, and so you probably have to take a look and spend a bit of time figuring out, okay, where's the easiest first step for me into this? It might be in something related to payments. It could be a simple, separate, standalone mobile app. I don't know off the top of my head, but you can go into our Mattermost community and start poking around in there, because there's a bunch of folks in our Mattermost community who are scheming on all sorts of different applications, from apps for voting and governance to things like what you're speaking about here with online education. And Greg, if you're listening, please go ahead and share the link to the Mattermost invite if we haven't already done so. Jordan says, with a system like Ethereum, smart contracts are redundantly transacted by many miners to ensure validity and security. What steps does Holo take to prevent distorted transactions / misinformation / malicious code injection? Holochain uses a different architecture than Ethereum uses. Ethereum is built on top of a blockchain architecture where you have people competing with one another to validate transactions, to validate processing of code in their case. And that competition results in people checking one another. With Holochain and Holo, you've got each user is always able to check the code for themselves. They are running their own local copy of the application themselves. The way we think about smart contracts is as sort of dumb applications. It's like a really simple application, right? With Holochain, when you're running an application, everybody's running identical code. So it's similar in that all of the parties who are choosing to participate are running identical code. And when somebody tries to do something, each party that sees that action checks themselves. Does that fit? Does that play by the rules? If it doesn't, they go, hey, this doesn't play by the rules. And they, one, refuse to continue propagating that, but two, they may raise a flag and a warning that somebody's trying to pass bad data. For more details on that, Jordan, I would check out the Holochain GitHub repo. It's probably the best place. If you go into our wiki, we've got a fair bit of stuff there in the frequently asked questions section. We also have our Holochain white paper, which dives into this stuff in really deep technical detail. But the wiki goes into it with some with a fair bit of I don't know. It's fairly understandable. You don't have to be super deeply technical. So the long story short is, anytime you take an action in a Holochain app, you're signing that. You're putting your reputation online. And the next person who checks it, if they see, wait, when I looked at it, it was different from what he said it was, you immediately start to have people around you able to raise flags about you behaving badly. That not only prevents that transaction from going through, it actually may impact your ability to transact in the future because you've just undermined your reputation as a good actor in the system. So the one thing to point out here is blockchain efforts have primarily focused on how can you enable people to interact without any reputation? How can you enable people to interact with anonymity? Whereas Holochain takes it a different way. We go, wait a minute, allow people to gain credit for having behaved well over time, enable people to get dinged when they misbehave, and you re-inject into the system all of the tools that social groups have for helping steer themselves. Gossip in the natural world, in the social world, is actually really useful. It's really important. It's something that helps individuals make better sense of their world because they're capable of figuring out information about what's happened to other folks, right? Oh, so-and-so did this, and she's, she made an amazing dinner the other night. And you go, wow, maybe I should invite her over because I would like to eat an amazing dinner too. Yeah. So I'll kind of leave it at that. We're making use of some social mechanisms for how to maintain social coherence in a group, rather than forcing everyone to battle against one another, to inject true statements into the social space. Our take on it is data isn't true. It's always spoken by an actor at a particular point in time. So what is the temperature in this room? Well, that's not really there's not a true answer to that. There's what is the temperature at this point, like right next to my mouth, which is going to be a little hotter than the temperature over here because there's hot air coming out of my mouth. But then you'd also have, well, how are you measuring that, right? So what is the temperature as measured by this thermostat at this point in space? Saying what is the temperature of the room is it's a way that we describe that. It's a way that we summarize that, but there's a more detailed truth to it about agents speaking. And we think that by keeping the agent visible in the speaking, it actually enables participants to make better decisions and exercise better judgment about who to rely upon and for what. Katie asks, what happens if net neutrality is repealed? How would this affect Holo? Two things there, and I think I mentioned this also last week. If net neutrality is repealed, it probably isn't going to affect us at all. It could be the case that some telecom provider finds Holo and Holochain apps to be problematic for them, competing with their own stuff, and they try to block it in some way. That would be pretty hard for them to pull off. But there could be something along those lines. The other piece, though, as I mentioned earlier, is Holo may end up actually helping to bootstrap incentivized mesh networks more effectively. And so, net neutrality is really important because right now we have a monopoly of bandwidth providers. There's only a handful of companies in each country that basically dictate or that set up and run all of the infrastructure for keeping us connected. And part of that is just a side effect of the protocols. The protocols themselves don't give us a way to compensate people for small contributions to the network, right? For small contributions of bandwidth to the network. The way it works is AT&T puts up towers, and they don't get paid for every tower they put up. But then I sign up with AT&T, and I pay them every month for this all-you-can-eat, data package. And it's not actually all you can eat. It's I pay for how much I use. And on the back end, they deal with sort of some rough setups with some other big players. With a Holo type ecosystem, you might start seeing things like me being able to share some capacity, whether it's by putting up an antenna, laying a piece of fiber, or just as I walk around with my phone, and enabling other people to literally reach out to the world faster, more effectively, et cetera, and get compensated for adding that little bit of extra capacity. We are just about out of time. I'll try to take one more question. What else we got? Will there be an app store? Also, if I don't code, is there still a way for me to help bring the apps I want for my communities to life? Robert asked that. So will there be an app store? Yes, there will be. We're planning to create what we're calling the App Store or Package Manager in the world of code. Often you'll pull down chunks of software and you can make use of those in your applications through a package manager. We're going to have an app store like that as well that's going to make it easy for people to download and install Holochain apps. The other question there, if I don't code, is there still a way for me to help bring the apps I want for my communities to life? Absolutely. One of the main ones is spreading the word, letting other people know about this. 2, starting by purchasing a Holo port and becoming a host, right? So making it so that this ecosystem in general starts to grow. Lastly, just starting to use these apps. So you might want a specific thing for your community. Probably the most important thing you can do is to begin playing with these applications now. Even if it's not the perfect app, even if it's not the one that you want for your community, getting used to using applications in a new way matters. It helps. It makes it so that you become accustomed to new patterns. You become more literate about how to, about what's possible. It also helps you, even if you're not a coder, it helps you start to be able, just playing in this space starts to help you be able to visualize what's possible, right? It's like, I don't know, I'm not a fan of Uber, but when Uber came about and people started going, oh my gosh, we're able to use our spare capacity on our cars, or we're able to use our spare capacity in our houses. It unlocked for non-programmers a whole new paradigm about our ability to reuse idle assets and make better use of the capacities in all sorts of different areas of our lives. So I think playing with new patterns is important, even if you're not a programmer. It can help you to have a better idea of what's possible so that you can help invent that new reality. All right. Thank you so much. Until next time, hello, Holo.